So in '65, I was in the Navy at the time on a ship in the Caribbean. And I received a letter from a friend of mine telling me about something he had read in the Durham paper, the newspaper, about this new program that Duke was starting in the fall of that year. And he knew that I was a corpsman, and he knew that I was scheduled to be discharged that fall when Duke was starting this new program. So he wrote me to see if I might be interested in that. So I wrote him back and told him I was very much interested. So he actually arranged when my ship got back into port in Virginia, he had arranged for me to go down to Duke, which is a couple hundred miles, and meet with Dr. Stead and several other people. So active duty Navy, I went to interview with these people, and then I had to go back to my ship, of course. So my ship was in the Mediterranean when I received a letter from Duke saying that I'd been accepted. The program, the first class was supposed to start in September, and I was scheduled to be discharged in October. So the administrative assistant to Dr. Stead at Duke wrote the captain of my ship a letter and explained to her that I had been accepted, and that, was it in a way that I could get out a little bit early so that I could not be late starting the program. And it all worked out so that that's exactly what happened. The Navy, my ship was still in the Mediterranean, but the Navy flew me back to the States and actually discharged me 30 days early. Now, another little interesting related thing to this is that, so this was in the mid-60s. Vietnam was hot and heavy. And many of my corpsman friends who were scheduled to be discharged were actually having their active duty time being extended against their will. I mean, they were not given a choice. Their discharge date was being moved back, and they were being assigned to Marine units and sent to Vietnam. So many corpsmen, at the very time that I was getting out 30 days early, many of my corpsman friends were actually being extended and having to stay in longer and go to Vietnam. And as we know, many of them did come back.
So there was 4 of you in the first class. Is that correct?
That was by design, because this was a brand new program. It had never been done anywhere before. So by design, Dr. Stead only wanted 4 in that first class because he didn't know whether it would succeed or not. He didn't want 20 people flop. It's better to flop with 4 than to flop with 20. So by design, that very first class was 4, and then the second class, I think, was 12. It was his idea too that, there were a lot of corpsmen and medics getting out of the service, and at that time there was nothing you could do in civilian life. I mean, you couldn't be a corpsman or a medic and then come out and be a nurse. You couldn't, even though many corpsmen had independent duty, they had seen everything, done everything, but then when you are discharged, you couldn't do anything. Yeah. Plus, in the mid-60s, there was a terrible physician shortage. So it was Dr. Stead's idea in the beginning for PAs to be military, once they got out of the military, to go to PA school, and in his words, extend the arms and legs of the physician. That was his idea, was to match up an ex-corpsman with a physician so that the physician wouldn't be so overworked, because he felt like that someone with less formal training than a physician could do many of the tasks that physicians do, which we all know that's very true. Probably 90% of what a physician does, someone with less than medical school training can do very well. And that was his idea. That was the birth of our profession. So yes, we had 4 in the first class, 3 finished one dropped out during our school. So 4 started, 3 graduated, and one of those 3 who graduated, 3 years after we graduated, died of a massive heart attack, 31 years old. And the other gentleman, named Victor Mino, he passed away a few years ago. So that leaves, I'm the only one in that first class.
Now, so just a quick question, because I know sometimes as a PA, sometimes doctors treat me poorly just because I'm a PA. How did Dr. Stead possibly get us to fly? So this is in the 60s. Doctors are doctors, and they're going to take corpsmen and kind of give them doctors' jobs. How was this accepted?
Well, I think if anyone other than Dr. Stead had started it, it probably would not have gone so well. But Dr. Stead was so well liked, and we stuck close to Duke, for the first couple of years. I mean, it's not like we went out in another state or something. So until the profession got going, we naturally stayed close to Duke. And Dr. Stead was so well known and well liked at Duke that if he told the people that they knew that it was his idea, that it was his program. Well, just because it was his meant that we got started on good foot.
And just so you guys know, the first day of PA week in October is Dr. Stead's birthday. Okay, so just as kind of a thanks to him, I could picture, hey, they're thinking of taking corpsmen and kind of training to be like 2nd, 3rd year residents. I could see Dr. What? That's crap. Oh, Dr. Stead wants it? Okay. I'm not going there. That's kind of what it sounds like, that this guy, he was this visionary. And how many PAs are there now? There's about 200,000. My friend, did you have any idea that this was not like, what did you think? This had to be a little bit risky. Get out of Navy. Oh, thank God you didn't go to Vietnam. What were you thinking?
Well, I thought from the very beginning that it would be successful, but had no idea. And I'm sure Dr. Stead himself had no idea it would become what it has become today. I thought it would be successful just because it made sense. It took manpower to fill a need. Manpower that had lots of practical experience, but not nearly as much classroom work.
You said Dr. Stead was very well respected and you stayed within Duke. So I imagine most people gave you respect because of Dr. Stead.
The physicians did.
That's what I'm just gonna say. The nurses, the labs,
Okay, that's interesting that you brought that up. Okay, yes, we were well accepted initially by the physicians because of Dr. Stead's program, and they respected him so much that they were willing to go along with it. And we were making headway with everyone, and because it was so new. I mean, people just didn't know how to act around PAs or what they were there for, what we could do or not do, or whatever. So understandably, all employees, patients, everybody were a little bit puzzled or had questions. We worked real hard to blend in, and we were making great progress until in 1966, Look magazine, which there were 2 main magazines at the time, Life magazine and Look magazine. Look magazine contacted Duke and asked if they could come down and do a feature article on this new program at Duke. And of course, Duke PA people agreed because it would give national exposure, because before it had just been pretty much a local program. So Look magazine came down, did this nice article. The article is great, but the title is awful. It says, "More than a nurse, less than a doctor." And the nurses went berserk. We had worked so hard trying to educate everyone on who we were and why we were there. And then this article came out that it set us back worse than we were at the very beginning. And I mean, I could not walk down the halls at Duke without being cornered by a nurse. And, you know, what do you mean? But anyway, after being cornered by so many nurses, I finally came up with an explanation that helped. I told them, I said, no, we're not more than a nurse, we're different than a nurse. Think about it this way. A PA is to a physician like an LPN is to an RN, and that helped.
I'm just curious when it started, I'm not asking you to tell me how much you made, but like, was it on par with nurses or
I
more than
don't know
nurses?
how compared to the nurses paid at the time, but I can tell you, when I started working as a PA in 1967, my annual pay was $7,200. And before you think you must be mistaken, that same year, right after I graduated from PA school, I bought a new 3-bedroom brick home for $18,000. So when you think about it that way, that $7,200 was good. When I retired in 2007, I worked for 40 years. And in 2007, my salary was $60,000.
I was studying up on you a little bit before you came. You were a charter member of the AAPA also. So you kind of were one of the people that helped start the AAPA. Is that
Right, the graduates from the first couple of classes started.
And correct me if I'm wrong, you wrote the first code of conduct for the PA profession?
Yeah, they appointed me chairman of the ethics committee when we started AAPA.
I was wondering about the program. Like now we go 1 year didactic and 1 year rotations. We rotate inpatient, surgery, and outpatient. Was it much different?
No, it's very similar. That's exactly what it was then. Now, one very interesting difference is that in your rotations, in the second year, now, you have a lot of choice which rotations you want to take. In that first class, it was as a new site got worked out, we were assigned to all of the rotations were at Duke, except you had one rotation with an outside physician, with someone, we were in Durham, so someone in Raleigh. I remember I was assigned when actually the state penitentiary here in Raleigh, I was told on Friday that, Ken, we want you to start Monday. So I spent 30 days in penitentiary when I
When you were working, like nowadays, especially those work in family practice, urgent care, like we are so autonomous. Most of the time, there's not even a physician in the building, or I should say a lot of the times. What was it like when you were working? Were you seeing your own patients? Were all your charts being signed? Were you writing your own charts? How did that go?
No, it's changed a lot from the very beginning because, like I said, Dr. Stead's idea was never for PAs to be working autonomously. It was his idea to extend the arms and legs of the physician. So his idea from the beginning was to match up a PA with a physician. And I worked with the same physician for the first 20 years. And back then, he did not want a licensure right away. He wanted the PAs to be able to do whatever the supervising physician felt like they were able to do. He didn't want a license if that would be restricted.
So when you started working, you didn't have a state license. There was no NCCPA back then, so you didn't have a national certification. You just did what your facility and doctor wanted.
Right. It put a lot on the physician because he was responsible for it. If we messed up, it would be bad on him. So I did not see any patients alone because he had a reputation and people coming to see him. How I helped the most in practice was I saw the new patients. And, because you got 1,000 questions that you do in a new patient workup, very time consuming, certainly didn't require Dr. Seeker's expertise to do. So that's how I worked primarily with him, was seeing the new patient. Then he would come in and see them briefly. But I would do all the time consuming stuff and then he would see them for 5 minutes. Now, I can tell you, it didn't take very long before the patients found out that if they had a question or needed something, they started asking for me. Because, it may take a day or two for them to get back, and so they started asking for me, and that kept me very busy.
Yes, sir, what do you got?
I imagine they started out mainly thinking PAs would be in family practice or
Yes, I think that was the original thinking, that it would probably fit best there because it was the family docs that were the most overworked. I mean, you had family docs out in rural areas they were the only medical person for miles around, and the family doc had no time off. I mean, he was on 24/7, 365. You couldn't even take a vacation because he's the only person. So yes, Dr. Stead did think that that would probably be one of the areas that VAs could fit in best. But it's interesting. It was those rural family docs that were most resistant to the idea because they had always done everything and they didn't know how to give up some of those chores, some of those duties.
I've never had this sensation before. I just pictured what was Dr. Stead like in 1964, 63. He one day had to wake up and go to his wife, I got an idea. And all of a sudden, think about how many PAs are now. How many patients have been cared for by PAs? 50 million, 100 million? Like that visionary physician who said, I got an idea. How many people have we touched? It's unbelievable, the vision. Sir, question that I've asked you before that I always had fun with is this: 2 truths and a lie. Let's play 2 truths and a lie about Dr. Stead. Sir, give us 2 truths about Dr. Stead and 1 lie. We got to pick out which one is the lie.
He loved peanuts. He graduated from Emory University in Atlanta. He always left work at 5 o'clock. Never snowing after hours.
All right, so which one was the lie? Peanuts, Emory, or he left work at 5 o'clock? If you think Peanuts was a lie, raise your hand. If you think Emory was a lie, raise your hand. Okay. And if you think he always left work at 5 o'clock was a lie, raise your hand. All right, sir, what's the lie?
The last one. He would show up in the middle of the night. We were given patients to work up, and at that time we had to do our own lab work. And he would show up in the middle of the night when we were working up patients and offer help. I mean, he wasn't just spying on us. That's just how, that's what kind of person he was.
When he gave you feedback, was he hard on you? Was he kind? Was he strict? Like we've all had different preceptors and different personalities. How was he?
He was better on PAs than he was medical students. Before PAs came along, he did a lot of teaching in medical school and residence. And I guess this was his baby, the PA concept. So there were many times that I felt like he went much easier on us than he did on medical students.
Questions from you folks? Yes, sir.
in the early part of the 70s, the Navy started recognizing PAs as warrant officers. Did you ever have any thoughts about going back in the Navy?
No, and if you have time, I can tell you why.
Why's that?
When I was in corpsman school, they had told us that the top 10% of our class could have their choice of a specialty school. So I went to corpsman school in Great Lakes, Illinois, which is between Chicago and Milwaukee. Well, most of my classmates were going to Milwaukee or Chicago every weekend, and a lot of times during the week. I stayed there studying because I wanted to get married and I wanted to go somewhere where my wife could go with me. So I studied, came in 5th out of 56. So then when I filled out my dream sheet for places to serve, the first place I put was physical therapy school in Bainbridge, Maryland. And I don't even remember what my second and third choices were because they had told us that we would get our first choice if we were in the top 10% of the class. My orders came back Iceland. So I decided then that I was gonna get out of the service.
Yes, ma'am.
It switched from just being foreman that were invited into the PA school.
It didn't take long at all. He wanted the first class to be all for him. No, even the second class had some people that were not.
Were they civilians or military?
Not military. There were a couple people, I think, who worked at duty.
Question? Yes, ma'am.
I'm curious to know if there's anything as you watch this profession kind of explode that you wish might have happened differently, or something you'd like to see happen with our profession that hasn't happened yet.
No, I don't think so. I think it has exceeded my expectations and everyone else's too. So no, I don't know of anything that could have been differently to make it better.
I was wondering too, like what you thought about the profession today.
It's changed because, like I said in the beginning, Dr. Stead never envisioned PAs working independently.
Yeah.
But, you know, things have changed so much now, it's very necessary and important that that be done. But at the time, when he started it, he didn't foresee that being the case.
Yeah, that's what I'm just wondering is if you felt not disappointed, but if you felt it's the wrong path for PAs to be kind of going for independence, or if it's just the natural course of the
I
profession.
think it's the natural course, you know, because, you know, some more people and there's good reason, I think, for it to be like it that didn't exist in.
Yes, sir.
I'm curious, why did you say yes to it? What this was never a thing before?
Well, two things. One was, I told you I'm from Durham originally, and this new program started in Durham at Duke. So this was something I could do and not have to relocate. So just the fact that I happened to be in the right place at the right time was attractive. The other thing was that I really liked what I was doing as a foreman. And there was nothing in civilian life that I could go into. So that was the other reason. It would just seem like a perfect answer to my situation.
Yes, ma'am.
So when you started accepting women, and you know what were the second year?
I think the second one was in West Virginia. Alderson brought us in West Virginia. There were several that started all about this, you know, just a couple of years after Duke. What was the other part of the
Other
class?
women were accepted in?
Oh, there was at least one woman in our second class, in the Duke second class. And she also was minority. There was a black lady, Joyce Nichols was her name, in the second class.
Sir.
So we kind of talked about a model. I was always taught that it was primary care. We were supposed to offload the primary cares. And I understand that you went into specialties right away.
Well, medical specialties, yeah, it was later that PAs could choose whether to go the medical route or surgery route. But just, I think because Dr. Stead was internal medicine, and I didn't mention how I got to know the doctor that hired me and I worked for 20 years was I had a rotation with him. So I spent a month with him and he decided right away, he offered me a job on my rotation. So as soon as and like I said a while ago, I didn't really want to relocate. And so here I had a job offer. So as soon as I finished my other rotations and graduated, I went to work with him. The physician I worked with was internal medicine. He specialized in pulmonary, but part of internal medicine. So everybody at first was one of the specialties in internal medicine just because that's what Dr. Stead was. So our rotations were pretty much, you know, internal medicine rotation.
Did you see that quickly evolve in the classes that came behind you where it kind of split into family medicine and we're like, oh, we can utilize these people everywhere?
Yeah, and especially like I mentioned earlier, they didn't say we had to stay at Duke, but they kind of encouraged us until things got worked out legally. Now, everybody didn't stay at Duke. I just did because that was my home and that's where I wanted to stay.
Cool. Yes, ma'am.
Well, so that was gonna be my question, was eventually PAs had to start working outside of you. I was wondering how they were, how they were
Except,
accepted, yeah.
well, again, it came from rotations because I know, I told you that the overworked family physicians out in the boondocks were were most resistant actually in the early days. That started changing as Duke started setting up rotations with rural doctors. Then some of these rural doctors who had PAs rotating through their practice wanted to hire them when they finished. So that really, because they could see how PAs could be so much help to them.
Yes, ma'am.
Not being in the military and not having family in the military, what did you do as a corpsman that you guys were the targeted population?
Well, I can give you a good example. I was in Iceland for a year at a small hospital, but then I was on ship with no doctor because it was a smaller ship. And so there were 3 corpsmen, no doctor on the ship I was on. So we had to do whatever came up. So you got to do everything. And that's why Dr. Stead was so interested because he knew that corpsmen had so much experience. Another thing too is that, sick call, so many more service people than there are, way too many for maybe 1 or 2 physicians. So the corpsman would hold sick call. Most of what came through sick call, the corpsman handled. And then, the more severe cases, the doctor would say.
Yeah, you think about when I was in combat, we had a coach. He took care of us. Like, he was our doc. You got a laceration, he's got it. You need antibiotics, he's got it. You need pain medicine, he's the guy. So that was Ken's responsibility. You figure it out.
But then when you got discharged, you could do absolutely nothing.
Question, yes, ma'am.
No. Because Dr. Stead had a grant to help get this started. So I was paid $200 a month to go to PA school. I think it was $200 a month the first year and $250 a month the second.
Yes, ma'am.
When you graduated your program, what kind of certificate did you get?
Just that, a certificate. Yeah, it was no degree because we didn't have a bachelor's degree. It was a certificate from Duke Medical Center saying we had completed the physician assistant. Now, soon after that, it became a bachelor's program. And then as part of the requirements to get into the program, you had to have enough classes so that with your 2 years of PA school at Duke awarded a bachelor's degree. Then a few years after that, they started requiring a bachelor's degree to be admitted, and then they awarded a master's degree at the end of the PA training. But in the very beginning, there was no degree certificate on.
Something that I've never asked. I'm interested in asking your wife, how was it to observe this and be a part of this?
I was really fascinated that this program was starting. I've never heard anything like it. And I was honored, really, for my husband to be chosen to be in that first class. It was a journey for both of us. We hadn't been married very long. And you have to have total support from your spouse or loved one or whatever. It was a difficult time for those 2 years. Some of it's extremely rewarding. It is to this day. And I'm just thankful every day that they chose Ken and we have been a part of this wonderful, wonderful program.
Okay, think about it. He was knocking on the door of Vietnam. Okay, that was as scary as it gets. You look back at time and that's like this no-win scenario. What a blessing, right?
PA school saved you.
Almost a certainty if I had not been accepted to the program at Duke that I would have been assigned to Vietnam.
So this is a question that I have quoted him many times at conferences. And Ken, as the first PA in the world, if you had one message, if there was one take-home point that you would want us all to hear, sir, what's one thing you'd want us to know?
Yeah, my message to each of you is that patients don't care how much you know, until they know how much you care. So resist becoming so busy that you don't have time to be a good listener. I think it's the most important thing that I can tell you. Be a good listener. You know, a lot of times we're tempted to, we think at the very beginning of seeing a patient, we think we know what the problem is and what they need, and you want to hurry up and do it and move on to the next one. But if you take time to listen to a patient, you might learn something.
I do have one thought, was just knowing that you were one of the people that started this history. Do you think about that at times? Does it hit you, your role in history, and how do you feel about that?
Only when I get asked to come. Actually, it was the 50th anniversary. Up until the 50th anniversary in 2017, no one had ever asked me to, had never contacted me about being in the first class to speak at a white coat ceremony or graduation or anything until 50 years later. Then I started getting all kinds of requests. People wanted me to come and speak at AAPA graduation or white coat ceremony. Well, I actually got to where I look forward to it. I really like to go and speak. But then shortly after I started being in demand, I started having a lot of back trouble. And then 2 years ago, I had major fusion T11 to pelvis. And now it's very difficult to do much standing or walking. So I'm pretty much not doing speaking anymore. And John contacted me to see if I'd come and speak to you today. And I'm glad to be.
Well, we're honored. We're honored.
Well done, sir. Very, very well done. Very, very well done. Very well done.